welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're cracking open a really fascinating stack of sources, and they challenge something pretty fundamental, I think, to the modern world. There's this belief that wealth equals security. Like, that's the ultimate goal, right? So our mission today is to really dig into the core contrast between what these sources call earthly wealth and eternal riches. We're going deep on the biblical indictment of hoarding. And it's interesting because, Scripture itself shows us people like Abraham, Job, incredibly wealthy, clearly faithful people. So why? Why does the Bible constantly seem to question, sometimes even condemn, the obsession with gaining more stuff? It seems less about having money and more about, well, where your trust really lies. Why is that pursuit, that accumulation, framed as such a spiritual danger zone?
That really is the critical distinction, isn't it? The sources we're looking at really emphasize that. Wise stewardship, hard work, those are honored, absolutely. But wealth becomes, let's say, spiritually toxic when it starts defining who you are. Or worse, when it steps in and replaces God as your functional source of security, your go-to. So we're kind of looking beyond just dollars and cents here, exploring what you might call a biblical economy. One where, internal character, eternal investments, they radically outperform temporary cash in the long run.
Okay, let's unpack that shift in perspective. Where do we start? I guess with Jesus's most direct challenge to that whole financial mindset, he lays out this almost impossible trade-off in Matthew 16:26. He basically asks us to calculate the value of everything we could possibly own against the actual price of our soul. He asks, what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? I mean, that's the ultimate bad bargain laid right out there. You could build empires, surround yourself with luxury, accumulate power. But if, in doing all that, you've traded away your spiritual core, your connection to the eternal, well, Jesus says you ended up bankrupt in the ways that truly matter. It's not just a loss, it's like total devastation.
Yeah. And that devastating choice, it's perfectly illustrated, I think, in the story of the rich young ruler. You find that in Mark 10. Jesus' command to him, sell everything, give it to the poor. It feels very specific, almost like a diagnostic test for him. It wasn't, because the money itself was somehow evil. It was because that man's wealth had this complete grip on his heart. It was his idol.
Mm-hmm.
He walked away grieving because he just couldn't imagine life without that safety net. He was trapped by it. His assets were whispering, you're safe, you're secure. But Scripture, again and again, hammers home this point. Security that comes only from physical stuff, detached from God. It's an illusion, a dangerous one.
Okay, so if wealth is security is the illusion, what's the reality? That seems to bring us right to how Jesus completely flips the script, flips the spiritual scoreboard, especially in the Beatitudes, right? Matthew 5. He starts the Sermon on the Mount by blessing the poor in spirit and the meek, which is countercultural, isn't it? Society usually sees meekness, maybe even poverty, as weakness, things you need to overcome. But Jesus holds them up as marks of blessing. Why is that?
Well, it's because they directly fight against that spirit of self-sufficiency that wealth tends to breed. These attitudes, being poor in spirit, being meek, they force dependence, they make you recognize your need, and that creates this vacuum that only divine help can actually fill. And being poor in spirit, just to clarify, it's not about being depressed or having low self-esteem necessarily. It's more like this humble, maybe even gut-wrenching acknowledgement that, look, we're morally and spiritually bankrupt without God's help. It's knowing you're empty and need filling. And wealth, or maybe the pursuit of wealth, it often just crowds out that essential realization. It encourages this aggressive self-reliance that can be, well, blinding. That's the danger.
That shift is huge, from relying on an illusion to fostering real dependence. So if the rich young ruler was caught in that illusion, where does it ultimately lead? This seems like a good place to transition from Jesus' teachings to those really powerful prophetic warnings against hoarding, specifically in the Epistle of James, James 5, verses 1-3. It pulls no punches.
Oh, it's far more than just a warning. It reads like a judgment scene. Like James is summoning the rich into a cosmic courtroom as defendants, and the imagery he uses for judgment is deliberately, well, grotesque. It's physical. He talks about riches that rot. He uses the Greek word supo, which is, the same word used for decaying corpses. It's graphic. And then he says, your gold and silver, the most durable things you can think of, aren't just tarnishing, they're actively rusting, corroding. And that corrosion itself will eat your flesh like acid fire. I mean, this isn't just spiritual metaphor. He's painting it as a prophetic reality. The things you trusted most turn and consume you.
Wow. But the judgment isn't only about the stuff decaying, is it? It's about what the act of hoarding was actually storing up.
Exactly. The real heart of the indictment is in that phrase. You have laid up treasure for the last days. The Greek word, therefore, treasured up is ithesaurisate. It literally means stored in a treasury. Okay, so James is saying, look, you thought you were depositing security into your account, but what you were actually depositing was divine anger. By storing up treasure just for yourselves while people around you were suffering, lacking basic things, by prioritizing accumulation over compassion, you were, in fact, laying up treasure for the last days. And the context makes it clear that treasure is wrath, not security. And this echoes things like Proverbs 11.4. Riches don't profit in the day of wrath. There's no financial bailout on Judgment Day.
That's an incredibly high stakes audit, and it ties back so clearly to that commercial language Jesus used in Luke 6, those woes, woe to you who are rich. He used that phrase, epicheteton paraklosin. That's literally a business term, right?
It is, yeah. It's ancient Greek bookkeeping language. It means received in full or paid in full, like stamping the receipt paid. And the devastating implication is, well, if you prioritized earthly comfort, if security in this life was your main goal, then that prosperity you achieved, that is your payment. That's the complete and final settlement of any claim you might have had on divine blessing or heavenly reward. You chased your reward down here, you got it, account closed. It's a really chilling warning against making temporary comfort the ultimate prize.
Okay, so let's pull this ancient warning into right now. I mean, we're constantly bombarded with the message that wealth is security, that financial independence is the ultimate freedom. How does this prophetic rust, this rot, show up today in our world of sophisticated banking and, digital everything?
Well, the sources suggest we're seeing this rotting riches idea play out in epidemics of anxiety, actually, especially at higher income levels. The aggressive pursuit of wealth, maybe the speed we chase it now, seems profoundly corrosive. We actually have data that kind of backs up James's warning about the treasure eating the person. There's one statistic showing people earning over, say, $100,000 a year often exhibit higher objective stress indicators like cortisol levels than those earning in a more moderate range, like $35,000 to $50,000. So the rust is literal in a way. You see higher earning executives, portfolio managers, sometimes suffering from chronic stress, elevated cortisol, increased heart disease risk, weakened immune systems. The stress isn't just about basic survival anymore. It becomes about the fear of loss, the relentless pressure to maintain and grow the fortune. The sheer effort of keeping it all starts to, well, consume the body from the inside out.
That makes a scary amount of sense. The more you have, the more complex it gets to protect it, right? More insurance, more lawyers, more complicated investments. It's like the modern version of moths and rust. But I want to pause here for a second, because this is where it can get tricky for listeners, I think. We're talking about hoarding, but surely things like saving for retirement, putting money aside for kids' college. That feels like wise stewardship, not idolatry. How do we tell the difference? Where's the line?
That's a really crucial distinction to make. And Scripture absolutely honors planning, saving, providing for your family. That's biblical wisdom. The difference, I think, comes down to the motive and the reliance. Wise stewardship ultimately serves others and honors God. Hoarding serves the self and functionally replaces God. So maybe ask yourself, is your saving strategy so big, so secure, that you feel absolutely no need for God's daily provision or help? If so, you might have crossed into functional idolatry. Or if you find yourself justifying zero generosity, zero compassion now, because you're chasing some future financial number, that sounds more like hoarding. The test is maybe whether your savings free you to be generous, or if they trap you in fear of not having enough later.
That focus on pursuing a number, that brings us right to what you might call the retirement idol. Modern culture pushes this financial independence or retire early dreams so hard. And it sounds responsible, but the spiritual danger seems to be in justifying minimal generosity now by promising you'll be generous, later once you hit that magic number.
Precisely. It becomes an excuse to postpone obedience, to postpone compassion. People end up storing up wealth, often way more than they realistically need for genuine security, while bypassing clear scriptural commands to care for the needy today. They end up serving an arbitrary number, maybe it's 2 million, maybe 5, whatever, and they miss the spiritual value that comes from dependency and immediate faithful generosity. That future promise overshadows present integrity.
And then there's digital hoarding. It doesn't even have to be physical gold anymore, does it? It's like obsessively checking stock apps, crypto prices, watching your net worth graph like it's your heartbeat, getting emotional highs or lows from it. The treasure is virtual, but the anxiety feels incredibly real.
And that anxiety is the rust eating the flesh, just playing out on your smartphone screen. You nailed it. The goal shifts subtly from wise investment to finding your self-worth or your ultimate comfort in a number that bounces around all day. If, say, a 10% market dip completely ruins your mood for the week, Well, that number is acting like your functional God. That's the modern version of being consumed by temporary riches.
Okay, so if the root problem is this idolatry of accumulation, this focus on self-sufficiency, then the antidote has to be an intentional shift, a redirection. What does this eternal portfolio actually look like? What are the practical, maybe daily things we can do to shift our allegiance away from the bank balance?
Well, the sources point towards things like active generosity, radical humility, and just plain faithfulness in the present moment. Paul urged Timothy, remember that those who are rich should be ready to share and willing to distribute. And by doing that, they're storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future. It's about building that eternal portfolio through present actions.
Right, so let's break down some of those actions. Jesus makes it clear, even tiny things matter. Like giving a cup of cold water in his name, he says it won't lose its reward. So the actions might seem small, but the eternal return is huge.
I think the first, and maybe the hardest step, is contentment. It's actively choosing to say, I have enough, especially in a culture that relentlessly screams, more, upgrade, you need this. Contentment, like Hebrews 13.5 talks about, is recognizing that God's presence, his sufficiency, is way more valuable than any possession. It just defangs that constant urge to acquire more.
And the natural result of contentment has to be generosity, but maybe specifically pure generosity. Not the kind you boast about or need a tax receipt for, but genuine, maybe even sacrificial giving when nobody's looking.
Exactly. Generosity is like the weapon we use to disarm the idol of wealth. If it's pure meaning, given without expecting anything back, not even recognition, it proves the treasure doesn't have that death grip on your heart. It becomes an act of faith that says, yeah, I trust God to take care of my tomorrow, even if I give away some of my excess today.
Okay, next up, integrity. Like refusing to cut corners financially or engage in shady deals even if it costs you, even if it means missing out on a big opportunity or a promotion.
Yeah, that's a huge marker for the eternal portfolio, being willing to accept maybe a lower earthly net worth to maintain righteousness. That's a powerful investment in eternal terms. Proverbs reminds us again, a blameless life is worth more than crooked gain when that final day comes.
And there's service, which often isn't about money at all, right? It's about time. Mentoring someone, visiting the sick, volunteering, things that have zero financial payoff, but huge eternal significance.
Service completely flips the score again. It reprioritizes your most limited resource, your time, away from just accumulation and towards real human connection and compassion. It forces humility. It forces you to see needs outside your own bubble. And those are the direct counter virtues to the pride that often fuels that hoarding mindset.
And finally, forgiveness. Letting go of debts, both financial and emotional. Choosing not to pursue revenge or hold on to grudges, that feels like a form of spiritual wealth itself.
Oh, absolutely. Forgiveness might be the ultimate spiritual currency. When you choose to release a debt, release a grievance, you're demonstrating this profound trust in God's justice and his provision. You're relying on him, rather than on your own power to settle scores using earthly means.
So for listeners who are maybe feeling a bit uncomfortable now, trying to figure out where they stand, how can they do a quick diagnostic? How can you gauge your own heart's relationship with money right now?
We could suggest maybe 2 quick tests. First, the detector test. How do you react emotionally when you experience financial loss? Maybe the market tanks. Maybe something gets stolen. If your anxiety, your grief, your anger feels way out of proportion to your actual survival needs being threatened, well, wealth might have become your functional god. You're grieving the loss of your security source, not just the assets. And second, the generosity gauge. How does regular sacrificial giving feel? The kind that actually costs you something, that you notice. Does it feel difficult? Do you find yourself regretting it afterwards? If giving sparks pain or regret, that accumulation mindset probably still has a pretty strong grip on your heart. It's trapping you in fear instead of freeing you up for faith.
This has been, well, quite the deep dive. It really clarifies a core truth, doesn't it? The gospel warns so strongly against the idolatry of wealth, not necessarily wealth itself. You can achieve everything the world calls success, climb the ladder, get the assets, max out the 401k, and still be utterly bankrupt spiritually. So the real question isn't, do you have money? It's, does money have you?
Exactly. And the consistent message from these sources is that accumulating wealth, particularly while others around you lack basic necessities, it actually stores up divine wrath. Which leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Scripture doesn't seem interested in giving us a specific dollar amount for when wealth becomes too much. Instead, it seems to define being rich as reaching a spiritual state. It's when you have enough for your genuine needs, but you continue to accumulate aggressively while knowing others lack essentials. That's the moment you cross into the territory James condemns so fiercely, regardless of the actual number in your portfolio. It's like the cosmic courtroom is waiting, and maybe your bank statement, or rather your attitude towards it, becomes a kind of spiritual diagnostic tool revealing your heart's true allegiance.
That's a powerful place to end. Definitely something to think about. We really encourage you to explore what this radical flip of the scoreboard might mean for your own life, your weekly routines, your financial habits. We'll be back soon for another Deep Dive.